He swore never to love again after the mysterious death of his wife. She only wanted a job to forget her own past, but that night he came home earlier and saw the nanny sleeping without clothes. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're watching from. The silence of the Morrison mansion was always the same, heavy like a wet blanket over one's shoulders. Henry walked along the cold marble corridors, his footsteps echoing against the dark mahogany-lined walls, each sound amplified by the empty vastness of what was once a home. 7 years, 7 long years since Helen had fallen down the library stairs, since the dull thud of her body against the marble had forever transformed the echo of that house into something haunting. He paused. Before her portrait in the main hall, those green eyes that once sparkled with life, now watching him with a cruel serenity. Helen had always known how to look at him, how to break through his defenses with a smile or a touch. Now all that remained were blurred memories and a guilt that grew like a weed in his chest. 42 years old, widowed, father to a girl who spoke more through drawings than to him. The pharmaceutical empire he had built with his own hands grew every day, but Henry felt himself shrinking inside, as if each contract signed, each decision made, sucked a little more of his humanity away. Isabella was in the game room, sitting on the light wooden floor, surrounded by colored pencils and scattered papers. At 7 years old, she had her mother's brown hair, but her father's dark, intense eyes. Since Helen's death, the girl communicated more through drawings than words, creating entire worlds on paper, where she could control every detail, every ending. Henry approached slowly, as he always did, trying to decipher what was going through his daughter's mind through those colorful lines. "What are you drawing today, my princess?" he asked, crouching beside her. Isabella didn't raise her eyes from the paper, but slid the drawing toward him. It was a house not unlike the mansion where they lived, but in the drawing there were people in the windows, flowers in the garden, a bright yellow sun in the upper right corner. People, plural. Henry felt his chest tighten when he realized that in his daughter's drawing they weren't alone. "Who are these people, Bella?" he asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. The girl finally looked at him, those dark eyes so similar to his own, but still carrying an innocence he had lost long ago. "They're the people who are going to live here with us," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The lady on the phone said she was sending someone to look after me while you work." Henry sighed. Mrs. Carmen, the housekeeper, had insisted that Isabella needed more attention, someone younger who could keep up with a child's pace. At 68, Carmen did what she could, but recognized her limitations. They had hired a nanny through an agency in New York, someone with impeccable references and experience with introverted children. Lily Davis. The name sounded foreign on his lips when he thought of it, carrying a softness that contrasted with the harshness of the world he lived in. "She arrives tomorrow," said Henry, picking up another drawing from the pile next to Isabella. This one showed a female figure with long dark hair smiling next to the girl. "How do you know what she looks like if you haven't met her yet?" Isabella shrugged, that universal gesture of children when they can't explain something they simply know. "I dreamed about her. She has sad eyes, but she smiles when she sees me." A chill ran up Henry's spine. Since her mother's death, Isabella sometimes said things that seemed to come from a place beyond a child's understanding. The doctors said it was normal, a way to process the loss, but there were moments when her words carried a weight that made him question what he really knew about his own daughter. That night, after putting Isabella to bed and listening to her whispered prayers, Henry took refuge in his office. The walls were lined with books on medicine, economics, and business administration, a library he had built over the years as an intellectual armor against the world. On the solid mahogany desk, piles of reports and contracts awaited his attention, but his thoughts were scattered. Lily Davis, 26 years old, education in pedagogy, experience with special children, references from families in New York and Boston. On paper, she was perfect for what they needed, but there was something in the tone of the agency woman that bothered him, a subtle hesitation when he asked questions about the candidate's personal background. He opened his laptop and reviewed the file they had sent again. Professional photo. Direct gaze at the camera, restrained smile. Dark brown hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Honey-colored eyes that seemed to hold secrets. There was something in that face that disturbed him, a familiarity he couldn't place. Perhaps it was just the paranoia of someone who had learned the hard way that we don't always know the people we let into our lives. Helen had secrets. He discovered this too late, when he found letters hidden in her room, correspondence with people he didn't know, references to meetings and conversations she had never mentioned. The investigation into her death had been quick, conclusive. Domestic. Accident. No signs of violence, no evidence that anyone else was in the house that night. But the letters remained an enigma, a reminder that even the closest people can be complete strangers. The clock on the wall marked almost midnight when Henry finally closed his laptop. Tomorrow, a stranger would enter his home, live with his daughter, occupy spaces that had remained empty for years. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have a female presence in those corridors again, the sound of lighter footsteps, a voice that wasn't his own or Isabella's, echoing through the rooms. The idea frightened him more than it should. Control. Everything in his life revolved around control, the ability to predict and manage every variable. A new person represented chaos, unpredictability, the risk that his carefully constructed routine would be disrupted. But Isabella needed it. And maybe, just maybe, he needed something different too, even if he didn't know exactly what. Rain was beating against the mansion windows when the black car climbed the winding road leading to the property. Henry observed from the office window, adjusting the cuff of his white shirt as he watched the vehicle approach. It was 9 o'clock on a grey Monday morning, typical of autumn in Aspen, and the fog enveloped the hills like a ghostly veil. Mrs. Carmen had already prepared the new nanny's room on the second floor, a comfortable space overlooking the gardens that Helen had once tended with such care. The driver who brought Lily stepped out first, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, whom Henry didn't recognize. It wasn't from the local taxi company they usually used. Then the back door opened and she appeared, dark hair dampened by the drizzle, a worn leather suitcase in hand, careful movements like someone who had learned not to make unnecessary noise. Even at a distance, Henry could sense her erect posture, the way she observed the facade of the mansion before heading to the main entrance. There was something in her walk that suggested caution, as if she were constantly evaluating the environment around her. Isabella had been anxious since breakfast, asking every 5 minutes if the young woman had arrived yet. When the doorbell finally rang, the girl ran to the entrance hall, stopping only when Henry placed his hand on her shoulder in a protective gesture. Mrs. Carmen opened the door and there she was. Lily Davis, exactly as in the photo but somehow different. The professional image hadn't fully captured the intensity of those honey-colored eyes, nor the way she seemed to assess every detail of the environment before speaking. "Mr. Morrison," she said, extending her hand in a formal greeting. Her voice was soft, with an almost imperceptible Virginian accent, but carried a firmness that contrasted with her physical delicacy. "I'm Lily Davis. Thank you for the opportunity." The handshake was brief, but Henry felt the texture of her hands, calloused in a way that didn't entirely fit with a nanny's work. They were the hands of someone who knew hard work, who had held things heavier than children's books and toys. He stepped back, maintaining the protocol distance he established with all employees. "Lily, this is my daughter, Isabella," he said, placing his hands on the girl's shoulders. "Bella, this is Miss Davis, who will take care of you while I'm working." The meeting between the two was surprising. Isabella, normally shy with strangers, stepped forward and extended her hand to Lily with a formality she had learned from watching her father. But when Lily crouched to be at the girl's height and held her small hand in both of hers, something changed in Isabella's expression. She smiled, a genuine smile that Henry hadn't seen in months. "You have sad eyes," said Isabella, with that brutal honesty of children. "But they're beautiful, like Mommy's in the portrait." Lily blinked, clearly not expecting such an observation. For a moment, her professional mask faltered, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "Thank you, Isabella. You have a very beautiful smile. I think we'll get along very well." Henry observed them interact, noting how Lily seemed genuinely touched by his daughter's spontaneity. There was a naturalness in the way she spoke with Isabella, without that forced condescension that many adults used with children. When she stood up, their gazes met for an instant, and he saw something in those golden irises that made him quickly look away. Recognition, as if she knew him better than she should. "Mrs. Carman will show you your room and explain the house." "Routine," said Henry, recovering his executive tone. "Isabella has private lessons in the morning, but the afternoons are free. She likes to draw and read. Avoid taking her to the garden when it's raining and never leave the library doors open when she's alone." "The library?" asked Lily, and there was something in her voice that made Henry look at her more closely. "My wife died there," he said dryly. "Isabella still gets disturbed when she enters the place alone." Lily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on him for a moment longer than would be natural. "I understand. I'll take all necessary care." The rest of the morning passed in a succession of introductions and practical explanations. Henry observed from a distance as Mrs. Carman showed Lily the house, noting how she paid attention to details, asking pertinent questions about Isabella's habits, but always with that evaluative look that bothered him. When they passed by the library, he saw how she slowed her pace, observing the environment with an intensity that seemed disproportionate for someone who was there just to take care of a child. At lunchtime, Henry decided to eat at home instead of going to the office, something he rarely did. He wanted to observe how Lily behaved with Isabella, to assess whether his decision to hire her had been right. The two sat at the table on the covered veranda, and he could hear them talking about drawings and stories. Lily had a way of speaking with Isabella that was both respectful and warm, treating her like a small person with valid opinions instead of just a child to be controlled. "Have you ever been married?" asked Isabella. With that direct curiosity that sometimes embarrassed adults, Lily hesitated for a moment before answering. "No, I've never been married." "And you? Do you intend to get married when you grow up?" "I think so," said Isabella, seriously considering the question, "but only if I find someone who doesn't yell at me and who likes my drawings. Daddy never yells, but he gets sad when he looks at Mommy's drawings." Henry stiffened in his chair. He didn't know that Isabella had noticed how he reacted to Helen's memories. He tried to focus on the reports he had brought, but found himself constantly paying attention to the conversation between the two. There was something hypnotic about Lily's voice, a melodious quality that made him want to keep listening, even when she talked about mundane things like favorite colors and preferred foods. During the afternoon, while working in his office, Henry could hear them playing in the game room. Lily had suggested they make an illustrated storybook, where Isabella would draw the images and she would write the words. It was a simple idea, but one that completely captured the girl's imagination. For the first time in months, Henry heard Isabella laugh out loud, a genuine and carefree laugh that made him stop typing and simply listen. When night fell, Lily said goodnight to Isabella and went up to her room. Henry remained in the office until late, but found himself unable to concentrate on work. Every noise in the house seemed amplified. Every movement upstairs caught his attention. It was strange having someone new living there, breaking the silent routine that had been established after Helen's death. But stranger still was the way he felt disturbed by Lily's presence, as if she brought with her not just a change in the dynamic of the house, but also a threat to something he couldn't identify. The first 2 weeks passed in a strangely harmonious routine. Lily adapted to the rhythms of the mansion with an ease that surprised even Mrs. Carman, who had initially been reserved about the idea of sharing the care of the house with a stranger. Isabella flourished under the dedicated attention of the new nanny, beginning to speak more, to ask questions about the world, to show curiosity for things beyond her own drawings. Henry observed these changes with a mixture of gratitude and uneasiness, as if his daughter's well-being came with a price he still couldn't calculate. Lily had established her own routine that fit perfectly with the family's schedule. She woke up early, even before Mrs. Carman and sometimes Henry saw her from the office window, walking through the property gardens while the sun rose between the mountains. She moved with a contained grace, occasionally stopping to observe the flowers that Helen had planted years before, many of them now wild and uncared for. There was something melancholic in the way she touched the withered petals, as if she recognized an abandoned beauty there. During breakfast, she and Isabella developed their own ritual. While eating, Lily would tell stories about her childhood in Virginia, about the Iron Mountains and the yellow tulip poplars that bloomed in spring. Her narratives had a nostalgic tone that made even Henry pause his morning newspaper reading to listen. She spoke of a simple childhood, of a grandmother who knew the name of every medicinal plant, of a younger brother who built stone castles in the backyard. But there were gaps in her stories, periods she skipped with subtle skill, and Henry noticed how her eyes darkened when Isabella asked about her parents or why she had left home. "Why did you come to New York, Lily?" asked Isabella one morning, while drawing a portrait of the nanny surrounded by yellow flowers. Lily hesitated, stirring her coffee more forcefully than necessary. "Sometimes we need to leave home to find who we really are," she finally said. "Like a seed that needs to be planted in new soil to grow properly." Henry looked up from his newspaper, intrigued by the evasive poetry. There was something in her voice that suggested the change hadn't been exactly voluntary, an underlying tension that contrasted with the tranquility she projected in Isabella's presence. When their gazes met by chance, he saw a flash of what could be fear, or perhaps just the caution of someone who had learned not to reveal too much about herself. The encounters between Henry and Lily were brief and formal, limited to daily reports on Isabella's activities and the practical needs of the family routine. He maintained a careful professional distance, but found himself paying attention to details. The way she tied her hair with a simple ribbon when she was concentrated, how her fingers nervously drummed on the table when he spoke to her, how she always left a coffee cup half full when he entered the kitchen. There was a contained energy in her, as if she were constantly preparing to flee or fight, and this tension began to infect him in an inexplicable way. One night, returning late from a meeting in New York, Henry found the house immersed in a different quietude than usual. The lights on the first floor were off, but there was a soft clarity coming from the library. Curious and slightly alarmed, he followed the glow until he found Lily sitting on the floor between the shelves, surrounded by open books, a lit candle beside her. She wore a white nightgown that revealed the delicate contours of her shoulders, her loose hair falling in waves over her chest. There was a vulnerability in her posture that completely contrasted with the composure she maintained during the day. "I'm sorry," she said, startling when she saw him at the door. "I couldn't sleep and thought I'd read a bit. I hope you don't mind." "I don't mind," he said, but his voice came out hoarser than he intended. "What are you reading?" She quickly closed the book, but not before he saw the title, A Volume of Poetry, by Emily Dickinson. Poetry. It always calms me when my head is too full. Henry entered the library, maintaining a safe distance but feeling the air charged with an unplanned intimacy. Helen used to read there too, especially in the last months, before her death, when she would stay up late leafing through books she never finished. "My wife also liked poetry," he said, not knowing why he was sharing that information. "She must have had good taste," replied Lily, rising gracefully and adjusting the books on the shelf. "This library is impressive. It must have taken years to form a collection like this." "A few generations," said Henry, observing how she handled the volumes with reverent care. "My grandfather started it, my father continued, and I just maintained it. And Isabella, does she like to read?" "She prefers to create her own stories in her drawings." He approached the leather armchair where Helen used to sit, running his fingers over the worn backrest. Helen used to say our daughter had too much imagination to be content with other people's stories. Lily observed him in silence for a moment, and he felt exposed under that golden gaze. There was an understanding there that bothered him, as if she could read things in him that he himself preferred to keep hidden. "It must be difficult," she said softly. "Raising a daughter alone, keeping all the memories and still trying to move forward." The observation hit a nerve he didn't know was exposed. "I don't move forward," he said, more honest than he intended to be. "I merely exist." The silence that followed was charged with a tension that neither of them seemed to know how to break. Lily blew out the candle, plunging the library into partial darkness illuminated only by the light from the hallway. "Good night, Mr. Morrison," she said, passing by him toward the door. As she passed, he caught her subtle perfume, something floral and discreet that mingled with the smell of old books. "Lily," he called when she was already at the door. "Yes?" "You can call me Henry, at least when we're alone." She nodded, but didn't say his name aloud, as if testing it on her lips would be too great an intimacy for that moment. After she went upstairs, Henry remained in the library for more than an hour, sitting in Helen's armchair, trying to understand why this woman's presence in his home was beginning to awaken things he had buried with his wife. There was something dangerous in the ease with which Lily moved through the spaces Helen had inhabited, in the natural way she occupied places that had remained empty for so long. When he finally went up to his bedroom, he heard soft footsteps on the floor above, as if she too was restless. The house, which for years had echoed only with its own ghosts, now vibrated with a new and disturbing energy, and Henry began to suspect that hiring Lily Davis had been the first truly impulsive decision of his adult life, and perhaps the most dangerous. The first month was completed with a subtle but undeniable change in the atmosphere of the Morrison mansion. Isabella's laughter echoed through the corridors with a frequency Henry hadn't heard since before Helen's death, and even Mrs. Carman commented on how the house seemed more alive with the new nanny's presence. But for Henry, this vitality came accompanied by a growing uneasiness that he couldn't name or control. Lily had established herself in the rhythms of the house with an almost supernatural ease. She knew everyone's schedules, knew when Henry would leave for the office, when he would return, what kind of mood to expect based on the expression on his face when he came down for breakfast. She anticipated Isabella's needs even before the girl verbalized them, knew exactly what story to tell when the child was melancholic, what activity to propose when she was restless. It was as if she had studied the family, mapped their emotional nuances with a precision that went beyond simple, professional observation. One Friday afternoon, Henry returned earlier from the office and found Lily and Isabella in the back garden. They had cleaned an abandoned flower bed and were planting flower seedlings, daisies, petunias, and jasmine, the same ones Helen had cultivated with such care. Lily was kneeling in the soil, hands dirty with mud, teaching Isabella how to make holes of the right size for each type of plant. The simple dress she wore, light blue with small white flowers, was stained with dirt, and there was a naturalness in her movements that contrasted with the always controlled posture she maintained. Inside the house, "Daddy!" shouted Isabella upon seeing him approach. "We're making Mommy's garden grow again. Lily said the plants were missing having someone to care for them." Henry felt his chest tighten at seeing that flower bed he had avoided for years being brought back to life. Helen spent hours there saying that talking to the plants helped her organize her thoughts. After her death, he had ordered that no one touch the garden, preferring to let it wither rather than having to face the memories it evoked. "I hope you don't mind," said Lily, standing up and cleaning her hands on an improvised apron. "Isabella showed me photos of how it was before, and it seemed important to her to try to recreate it." There was a caution in her voice, as if she knew she was treading on delicate territory. Henry observed the newly planted seedlings, small, points of color against the dark earth, and felt a complex mixture of pain and something that could be gratitude. "Helen used to say that gardens need love to flourish," he finally said. "And now they're going to have lots of love," said Isabella, grabbing Lily's dirty hand. "Lily promised that we'll take care of them together every day." That night, during dinner, Henry found himself observing Lily with more attention than usual. There was something different about her since the afternoon in the garden, a lightness that wasn't present before, as if caring for the plants had awakened a part of her that remained dormant. She told stories about the grandmother who taught her to identify medicinal plants, about how some flowers needed more shade, others more sun, and how the soil had to be prepared with patience before planting. "Did you learn all this from your grandmother?" asked Isabella, completely fascinated. She used to say that plants are like people, replied Lily. Some need more care, others are more resilient, but all need a little love to grow properly. Her eyes met Henry's for an instant, and he felt as if she were talking about something more than gardening. After dinner, while Lily put Isabella to bed, Henry headed to the garden. The night was clear, with a crescent moon illuminating the newly planted seedlings. He knelt where Helen used to kneel, feeling the moist earth between his fingers, trying to remember the last time his wife had worked there. It had been 2 weeks before her death, on an October afternoon similar to this one. She was planting lily bulbs to bloom in the spring that would never come for her. "I'm sorry if I invaded a space that wasn't mine," said a voice behind him. Henry turned and saw Lily standing at the garden entrance, still wearing the dirt-stained dress, her hair tied in a disheveled bun. In the moonlight, she seemed ethereal, like an apparition risen from the very flower beds they had awakened. "You didn't invade," he said, rising slowly. "Helen would be happy to know that someone still cares about her flowers." Lily approached, stopping at a respectful distance, but close enough that he could smell her subtle perfume mixed with the scent of fresh earth. "Isabella has a lot of her, doesn't she? The way she looks at things as if she could see more than she should." "Sometimes it scares me how much she resembles her mother," admitted Henry. "Not just physically. Helen had an intuition about people that was almost supernatural. Isabella inherited that." "And what did she intuit about you?" asked Lily, the question coming out before she could censor herself. Henry looked at her, surprised by the boldness of the question. There was something in the darkness of the garden that seemed to invite confidences, that made it easier to speak truths that daylight would render impossible. "That I was weaker than I appeared. That beneath all the control or the planning, I was just a man afraid of not being enough. And was it true?" "It is true," he corrected. "Helen knew how to see me beyond the defenses I built, and that terrified me as much as it fascinated me." They were silent for a few minutes, observing the seedlings that seemed like small miracles under the silver light. There was an intimacy in the air that neither of them had planned, an emotional proximity that arose from the combination of moonlight, freshly turned earth, and the shared memories of a woman who was no longer there to claim her place. "May I ask an indiscreet question?" Lily finally said. Henry nodded, even knowing that he should be more careful. "How did she really die? I know it was an accident, but—" She hesitated. "Isabella sometimes says strange things about that night." The question hit Henry like a punch to the stomach. No one had ever questioned the official version, or at least never in his presence. "Why are you asking?" "Because a 7-year-old child shouldn't have nightmares about her mother calling for help if she died instantly in the fall," said Lily softly. "And because there's something in this house that can't rest." Henry felt the world waver around him. Isabella had never told him about the nightmares, never mentioned hearing Helen calling for help. What else did she say? That sometimes she hears footsteps in the library in the middle of the night, that she finds books open to pages that no one was reading. That Mommy is trying to tell something important, but no one is listening. The revelation fell upon Henry like a cold wave. He himself had heard strange noises in the house, found things out of place, but had attributed it all to his own tormented imagination. Discovering that Isabella shared these experiences made him question everything he thought he knew about the night he lost his wife. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked, the question coming out more vulnerable than he intended. Lily looked at him with those golden eyes that seemed to hold more secrets than a 26-year-old woman should have. "I believe that some truths are too powerful to die along with those who knew them." The conversation in the garden changed something fundamental between them, as if an invisible barrier had broken, leaving in its place a dangerous intimacy that neither of them knew how to manage. In the days that followed, Henry found himself observing Lily with an attention that went far beyond professional interest. He noticed how she bit her lower lip when she was concentrated, how her eyes became distant when she thought no one was looking, how she always left her bedroom door ajar at night, as if she were expecting or fearing something. Isabella began to talk more about her dreams with her mother, revelations that came out in fragments during the day's activities, like pieces of a puzzle that Lily patiently assembled. The girl drew Helen standing in the library, pointing to a specific wall. She drew withered flowers that came back to bloom. She drew a man in a dark suit visiting the house in the rain, always seen from behind, always faceless. And when Henry asked who the man was, Isabella said simply, "Someone Mummy didn't want to let in." It was Lily who suggested exploring the library more carefully, looking for something Helen might have hidden. The idea should have sounded absurd to a rational man like Henry, but there was something in her conviction, in the way she talked about truths that needed to be discovered, that made him agree. On a Sunday afternoon, while Mrs. Carman had taken Isabella to visit a cousin in town, they found themselves alone in the library for the first time since that night of the first month. Lily had brought a flashlight and gardening gloves, demonstrating a preparation that suggested she had thought about this before. If she hid something, it would be in a significant place for her, she said, examining the shelves closest to Helen's favorite armchair. A place where she felt safe, but that would also be easy to access. They worked in silence for almost an hour, removing books, looking for hidden compartments, testing loose floorboards. Henry was surprised to discover how much he didn't know about the hidden corners of his own house, places Helen could have used without him ever knowing. It was when they were checking the wall behind the poetry section that Lily found something strange. "Henry," she said, her voice tense. "This wall sounds different here." He approached, putting his ear against the dark mahogany where she indicated. There was a hollow sound, as if there was an empty space behind the wood. Carefully, they removed the panel, revealing a small compartment that contained a metal box, old and with signs of rust. Inside it, letters. Dozens of letters in sealed envelopes, some in Helen's handwriting, others in a male handwriting that Henry didn't recognize. His hands trembled as he opened the first letter from Helen, dated 6 months before her death. "August," the letter began, "I need you to stop this persecution. What happened between us was a mistake that I pay for every day, but I cannot allow this to destroy my family. Henry is a good man, and Isabella doesn't deserve to grow up in the shadow of our mistakes." Henry felt the world waver. August. His wife had had a relationship with someone named August, someone who apparently hadn't accepted the end of this relationship. He looked at Lily, who had gone completely pale upon hearing the name. "Do you know that name?" he asked, noticing her reaction. Lily didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the letter as if she was seeing a ghost. "August is my father," she finally said, her voice almost inaudible. The silence that followed was deafening. Henry felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "Your father," he repeated slowly, trying to process the information. "Your father had an affair with my wife." "I didn't know," said Lily quickly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I swear to God I didn't know. He offered me this job, said it was a unique opportunity, that I would be perfect to take care of a traumatized child. He said he knew the family, that you needed someone trustworthy." Henry read more letters, each one revealing layers of a betrayal he had never suspected. Helen begged August to leave her alone, threatened to tell Henry everything if he didn't stop looking for her. August responded with blackmail, saying she couldn't simply discard what they had, that he knew things about her that could destroy her marriage. The letters became progressively more desperate on both sides, culminating in a final missive from Helen, unsent, dated the day of her death. "August," said the final letter, "if anything happens to me, know that I have left evidence of everything you did to me. And if you touch my daughter or my husband, it will come to light. Some things are stronger than death." Henry looked at Lily, who was crying silently, hands covering her face. "You came here for him," he said, "and it wasn't a question." He said, "It was to observe, to report on your routine, on how Isabella was recovering. He said he was concerned about your well-being after what happened." She raised her eyes to him, and Henry saw a pain there that mirrored his own. "But I couldn't do it. From the first day, from the moment I saw Isabella, from when I began to know you, I couldn't be the spy he wanted. Then what are you? Asked Henry, his voice hard as ice. I am a woman who fell in love, said Lily, the words coming out like a confession forcibly extracted. With a girl who draws the world as she would like it to be. With a man who carries pain like armor, but is still capable of kindness. With a house that should have been just a job but became a home. The revelation hung between them like an abyss. Henry felt anger, betrayal, confusion, but also something more dangerous, relief. Relief to know that the connection he felt with her wasn't imagination, that the energy that crackled between them in nocturnal conversations and casual encounters was real and reciprocated. Your father killed my wife, he said, testing the words, seeing how they sounded aloud. I don't know, replied Lily honestly. But after reading these letters, I think it's possible. He was always a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. And when he felt rejected, she stopped, as if the memories were too painful to verbalize. When he felt rejected, what? He became violent. That's why I left home. That's why I abandoned my younger brother. She stood up, walking to the window where Helen used to sit to read. I should have stayed, should have protected my brother, but I was too cowardly. And now you're here, in the house of the woman he possibly killed, in love with her husband, Henry completed. Lily turned to him, golden eyes shining with unshed tears. And now I don't know if what I feel for you is real, or if it's just another way to try to correct the mistakes of my past. Henry stood up too, crossing the space between them with measured steps. When he stopped in front of her, he could feel the warmth of her body, see the small freckles that dotted her cheeks, count the golden nuances in her eyes. There's a way to find out, he said, his voice hoarse. And then he kissed her, a kiss that was both punishment and forgiveness, anger and desire, a collision between two people who had been thrown against each other by forces they didn't control. Lily surrendered to the kiss for a moment before pulling away, breathless. This is wrong, she said. Everything about this is wrong. I know, replied Henry, but maybe wrong is the only thing that makes sense now. The days that followed the discovery of the letters were marked by a tension that seemed to electrify the air of the Morrison mansion. Henry and Lily moved around each other like magnets with conflicting polarities, sometimes irresistibly attracted, sometimes repelling with a force that left them exhausted. The kiss in the library had opened a door that neither knew how to close, and each casual encounter in the hallways, each exchange of glances during meals, each moment when their hands accidentally touched, only intensified the electricity between them. Lily tried to maintain normalcy for Isabella, but the girl with that supernatural perception she had inherited from her mother began to ask uncomfortable questions. Why do you and Daddy look at each other like you have a secret? She asked during the afternoon snack, while drawing another of her enigmatic creations. And why do you stop talking when I arrive? We don't have any secrets, Lily lied, but her cheeks blushed in a way that made Isabella tilt her head with curiosity. Mommy said that adults always think children don't notice things, but we notice everything, said the girl, adding an intense red color to her drawing. She said that love sometimes hurts before it heals. Isabella's words echoed in Lily's mind throughout the afternoon. When Henry arrived from the office, she was waiting for him in the garden, where they had planted Helen's flowers. The seedlings were already growing, small points of color that contrasted with the dark green of the surrounding foliage. There was something symbolic in that rebirth that touched her deeply, as if life were insisting on flourishing despite all, the pain and complication. We need to talk, she said when he approached, still dressed in the dark suit from work, his tie loosened around his neck in a way that made him seem more human, more vulnerable. About the letters? He asked, sitting on the stone bench that Helen had placed there years before, so she could admire the flowers while resting. About everything. Lily sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance, but close enough to feel his warmth in the cool afternoon breeze. About your father, about Helen, about what's happening between us. Henry was silent for a moment, observing the flowers she had planted with such care. I hired a private investigator, he finally said, to find out more about Helen's death, about your father. If he really did what we suspect, I need to know. Lily felt her stomach contract. And if you discover that he did, then he'll pay for it? Henry's voice carried a coldness she had never heard before, a harshness that revealed the ruthless businessman he could be when necessary. And I will leave, she completed, because I can't stay here knowing that my blood is connected to the man who destroyed your family. No, said Henry, turning to look at her directly. You will not leave. The firmness in his voice surprised her. Henry, be reasonable. Isabella is getting attached to me, you're getting attached too, but this is unsustainable. I am the daughter of the man who possibly— You are not responsible for your father's crimes, he interrupted, moving on the bench to be closer to her. And besides, there's something you need to understand. Helen had an affair, yes, but her marriage to me was already in crisis long before that. The revelation caught her off guard. What do you mean? Henry ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned to recognize as a sign that he was struggling with something difficult to explain. In the last few years, Helen had become a different person. Distant, secretive, sometimes cruel. There were nights when she would disappear without explanation, days when she barely spoke to me or Isabella. I thought it was late postpartum depression, or maybe the stress of being a businessman's wife. But it was the affair with my father, probably, and maybe it started as a search for something she felt she was losing in our marriage. I'm not saying the betrayal was justified, but— He paused as if trying to find the right words. But maybe I wasn't the husband she needed. Lily turned completely to him, seeing for the first time the vulnerability he tried to hide behind the facade of control. You blame yourself for her death. Every day, he admitted. If I had paid more attention, if I had realized she was in danger, if I had been a better husband— Stop. Lily placed her hand over his, a gentle but firm touch. You can't hold yourself responsible for the choices she made or for my father's actions. Helen was an adult woman who made her own decisions. How can you defend her after knowing she betrayed her family? Because I understand what it's like to be trapped in an impossible situation, said Lily softly. What it's like to feel there's no way out, that any choice you make will hurt someone you love. Helen was being blackmailed by my father. The letters make that clear. She was both victim and guilty. They sat in silence for a few minutes, hands still intertwined, watching the sun begin to set behind the mountains. There was something deeply intimate in that moment, a connection that went beyond physical desire or emotional attraction. It was as if they were recognizing in each other the wounds they carried, the guilt that haunted them, the capacity to love despite everything. Lily, Henry finally said, regardless of what we discover about your father, regardless of how all this began, what I feel for you is real. It's the most real thing I've felt in years. I know, she whispered. I feel the same thing, but that doesn't make it easier. I don't want it to be easy, he said, raising his free hand to touch her face. Easy is what I had with Helen in the beginning, and see how it ended. I want something true, even if it's complicated, even if it's painful. Lily closed her eyes at his touch, allowing herself for a moment to imagine what it would be like if they were different people, in different circumstances, if the past weren't a constant shadow over any future they might build together. And Isabella? How do we explain to her? Isabella already knows, said a small voice behind them. They turned, startled, to find the girl standing at the garden entrance, still holding one of her drawings. On the paper, 2 adult figures held hands in a flowery garden, while a child smiled beside them. Above the figures, a woman with wings, clearly Helen, observed the scene with a serene expression. Bella, Henry began, but the girl approached and extended the drawing to them. Mommy said it's okay, she said simply. She said that true love is stronger than mistakes, and that you'll take good care of each other. The girl looked directly at Lily, and she said you don't need to be afraid, that you're not guilty of your father's sins. Tears began to stream down Lily's face. The idea that Helen, even dead, could somehow bless their relationship seemed impossible and at the same time perfectly natural. How does she know about my father? The dead know everything, said Isabella, with the frightening naturalness of children. They just can't do anything about it anymore. They can only watch and hope that the living make the right choices. That night, After Isabella went to bed, Henry and Lily met again in the library. This time there were no pretexts or excuses. They kissed with the desperation of two people who had spent too long denying what they felt, with the passion of those who knew that true love is rare and precious, regardless of how it comes to us. The night they finally gave themselves to each other was marked by a storm that lashed the windows of the mansion with a fury that seemed to echo the intensity of what was happening between them. Henry took her to his bedroom for the first time, a space that had remained untouched since Helen's death, preserved like a mausoleum of memories he couldn't discard or revisit. But with Lily there, the room came alive again, ceased to be a sanctuary of the past, to become the setting for an urgent and necessary present. Their encounter was both brutal and tender, marked by a hunger that had been contained for months and by a tenderness born of mutual recognition of the pain each carried. Henry loved her like a man who had forgotten how to express feelings, with an almost desperate intensity that she received without reservations, giving herself completely to him in a way she had never done with any other man. When they finally fell asleep, intertwined in the bed that had once been Helen's, the storm had diminished to a gentle rain that fell like tears of relief on the windows. The next morning, Henry awoke with the sensation that he had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Lily slept beside him, her dark hair spread across the white pillow, an expression of peace on her face that he had never seen during the day, when she always maintained that subtle vigilance that he now understood originated in fear of what her father might be planning. He got up carefully so as not to wake her, put on a robe and went to the window. Down below, the garden she had helped resurrect gleamed with morning dew, the flowers seeming more vibrant after the previous night's rain. It was then that he saw the car, a black sedan parked at the entrance to the property with a man leaning against it smoking a cigarette while observing the house. Even at a distance, Henry could see that the man was older, perhaps in his 50s, with greying hair and a posture that suggested authority and impatience. It didn't take much to deduce who it was. August Davis had decided to pay a personal visit. Henry woke Lily gently, seeing how she passed from the tranquility of sleep to alert tension in a matter of seconds when he mentioned the car at the entrance. She dressed quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she buttoned her blouse, the fear evident in every movement. "He came because he found out," she said. "Somehow he discovered that I'm not fulfilling what he wanted. Or he came because the investigator I hired started asking questions," replied Henry, taking the letters they had found in the library and storing them in the office safe. "Either way, I won't let him enter this house. Not while Isabella is here." They went downstairs together, Lily visibly nervous, Henry with that controlled coldness he assumed when he needed to deal with difficult business situations. Mrs. Carman had already taken Isabella to the kitchen at the back of the house, following instructions Henry had given previously should something like this happen. The doorbell rang exactly when they reached the entrance hall. Henry opened the door, keeping his body positioned to protect Lily, who stayed a few steps behind him. The man before him was exactly as he had imagined, tall, well-dressed, with dark eyes that resembled Lily's, but without the warmth that made hers so expressive. There was a subtle cruelty in his smile, a predatory confidence that immediately put Henry on guard. "Mr. Morrison," said August, his voice carrying a more pronounced Virginian accent than his daughter's. "Finally we meet in person. I am August Davis, father of your employee. What do you want here?" asked Henry directly, making no move to invite him in. "I've come to fetch my daughter," said August, his eyes moving to Lily. "It seems she has forgotten her family obligations." "I'm not going with you," said Lily, taking a step forward. "Not after knowing what you did to Helen." August's smile widened, but didn't reach his eyes. "And what do you think you know about Helen Morrison, my dear? I know that you blackmailed her. I know that you threatened her, and I know that on the day she died, she had decided to tell Henry everything." "Interesting theory," said August, lighting another cigarette, despite the fine rain that was still falling. "But theories aren't evidence, are they, Mr. Morrison? And evidence is very difficult to find when someone knows how to properly erase it." The implicit threat in the statement made Henry step forward, placing himself completely between August and Lily. Are you confessing to a crime? I'm simply observing that accidents happen, said August with an icy indifference. Especially to people who don't know when to stop asking inconvenient questions. Helen learned that the hard way. It was then that Lily exploded. You killed her, she shouted, trying to get past Henry to confront her father. You killed Helen because she didn't want anything more to do with you. August laughed, a humorless sound that echoed in the wet courtyard. My dear daughter, you were always very dramatic. Helen died because she tripped on a wet staircase during a storm. A tragic accident, but perfectly explainable. Liar! Careful, Lily, said August, his voice becoming colder. Unfounded accusations can have consequences, especially for people you love. His eyes moved significantly toward the house, where everyone knew Isabella was. It would be terrible if something happened to that charming little girl. Accidents seem to follow this family, don't they? Henry felt a cold anger take hold of him, a controlled fury he rarely experienced. But when it came, it was absolute. If you touch a hair on my daughter's head, he said, his voice low and lethal, I will destroy you in every way possible. Financially, socially, physically, if necessary. Threats, Mr. Morrison? How disappointing. And I thought we were civilized. Men. August dropped his cigarette on the ground and stepped on it. Very well. I'll leave a simple proposal. My daughter comes back with me today, and you never hear from me again. Refuse, and you'll discover that I can be a very creative enemy. No, said Lily firmly. I'm not going anywhere with you, never again. August looked at her for a long moment, as if measuring her determination. You were always stubborn, just like your mother. And see where that led her. The mention of Lily's mother was like a slap to her face. Henry saw how she paled, how her fists clenched, and knew there was a story there that he still didn't completely know. You have no right to speak of her, said Lily, her voice trembling with contained anger. I have every right, replied August. Just as I will have every right over you and this family when I decide to exercise them. You don't know who you're dealing with. It was then that Isabella's voice echoed from inside the house. Daddy, is everything okay? August smiled upon hearing the girl's voice, and there was something so sinister in that smile that Henry felt a chill run down his spine. What a sweet voice, he said. Helen used to talk about her with such affection. It would be a shame if... Henry didn't let him finish the sentence. In 2 quick steps, he grabbed August by the collar of his shirt and pushed him against the car. If you threaten my daughter again, accident or not, you'll discover what I'm capable of when someone touches my family. August didn't seem intimidated. In fact, he seemed pleased to have provoked this reaction. Physical aggression, Mr. Morrison? In front of witnesses? How reckless. He straightened his shirt when Henry released him. I'll give you a week to reconsider. After that, things will get complicated. He got into the car and left, leaving only the smell of cigarettes and a sense of threat that hung in the air like the very storm that was approaching again on the horizon. Henry and Lily stood in the courtyard, watching the car disappear down the winding road, both knowing that the war had only just begun. The days following August's visit were marked by a tension that infiltrated every corner of the Morrison mansion. Henry hired private security for the property, discreet but vigilant men who positioned themselves strategically around the house. Isabella could no longer play in the garden alone, and her private lessons were transferred inside. The girl sensed the change in the air, and her drawings began to reflect this anxiety. Shadowy figures at the edges of the paper, withering flowers, houses with closed windows. Lily barely slept, starting at any noise during the night. Henry sometimes found her standing at the window of her room, watching the entrance to the property as if expecting to see her father's black car appear again. At any moment. She had lost weight, her once rosy cheeks now pale, her golden eyes shadowed by dark circles of insomnia. When he tried to console her, she would let herself be embraced for a few moments before pulling away, as if physical contact were both necessary and too painful. He won't give up, she said one night, as they walked down the corridor after. Putting Isabella to bed. I know my father. When he wants something, he doesn't stop until he gets it. And now he doesn't just want to punish me for having disobeyed. He wants to destroy you too." "Let him try," replied Henry, but his voice carried a concern he couldn't completely hide. "I have resources. I have connections. He can't simply—" "Yes, he can," interrupted Lily. "You don't understand how he operates. He doesn't attack head-on like he did here. He works in the shadows, corrupts people, plants evidence, creates situations that seem like coincidences until it's too late to react." She stopped in front of her bedroom door, her hand on the doorknob. Helen discovered this too late. It was that same night that the private investigator Henry had hired called with disturbing news. The man had discovered more than they expected about August Davis. He wasn't just a businessman from Virginia with obsessive tendencies. He was a man with dangerous connections, involved in money laundering and blackmail schemes that extended across several cities. Helen had gotten involved with him during a period of vulnerability in her marriage, but when she tried to pull away, she discovered that August wasn't the type of man who accepted rejection. "I found evidence that he was in Aspen the night your wife died," said the investigator over the phone, his voice tense. "There are records of him staying at a local hotel but under a false name. And Mr. Morrison, there's one more thing. August Davis has a history of domestic violence. Lily's mother died under suspicious circumstances when she was a teenager." Henry felt his blood freeze in his veins. What kind of circumstances? Officially, suicide. Unofficially, there are indications that she was trying to leave him, had discovered his illicit businesses, and was threatening to expose him. Her death conveniently ended any investigation. After hanging up, Henry sat in his office for hours trying to process the information. Lily didn't know the truth about her mother's death. That much was clear from the way she spoke of her own childhood memories. August had manipulated the narrative to protect his own image, making his daughter believe that her mother had given up on life out of weakness rather than having been killed for trying to escape him. The next morning, Henry decided to tell Lily everything. He found her in the garden, kneeling among the flowers they had planted together, trying to find some normalcy in the routine of caring for the plants. When he approached, she looked up, and he saw an exhaustion there that went beyond lack of sleep. "I need to tell you something about your mother," he said, sitting on the bench beside the flower bed. Lily stopped working the soil, her dirty hands going still. "My mother killed herself when I was 17, she said simply. She couldn't bear the depression anymore. "No," said Henry gently. "Your mother didn't kill herself, Lily. She was killed. By him." What followed was one of the most painful moments Henry had ever witnessed. He saw Lily process the information, saw how the memories she kept of childhood reorganized under a terrible new light. The tears came slowly, then in torrents, and she cried not just for the mother she had lost, but for the version of her own life that had just collapsed. "I always knew something was wrong," she said between sobs. "My mother wasn't depressive. She was the strongest person I knew, but he said she couldn't live with her own weakness anymore." "He manipulated you since childhood," said Henry, holding her dirty hands between his own. "Made you believe that escaping him would be a betrayal of your mother's memory, when in truth, fleeing was exactly what she would have wanted for you." "And I left my brother with him," whispered Lily. "My God, I left Gabriel alone with a murderer." "Where is your brother now?" "I don't know. I lost contact with him when I left home 3 years ago. August said that Gabriel didn't want to talk to me anymore, that I had abandoned the family." She stood up abruptly, beginning to pace in nervous circles. "I need to find him. I need to know if he's alive, if he's safe." "We'll find him," promised Henry. "But first we need to protect ourselves. August won't wait long to make his next move." As if his words had been prophetic, Henry's phone rang at that moment. It was his lawyer, with alarming news. An investigation had been opened against his pharmaceutical company, based on anonymous allegations of irregular business practices. Simultaneously, Child Protective Services had received a complaint about neglect in Isabella's care, with allegations that the child was being exposed to improper situations due to his relationship with the nanny. "It's him," said Lily, when Henry hung up the phone. "This is how it works. He attacks on multiple fronts at the same time, creating so many problems that you can't adequately defend against any of them. Henry felt a cold anger settling in his chest. August had turned this into a war, and wars had casualties. But he had underestimated the determination of a father protecting his daughter and of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "It's time to hit back," he said, picking up the phone again. "If he wants to play dirty, he'll discover. He's not the only one who knows how to do that." But even as he made calls to lawyers and influential contacts, Henry knew they were entering dangerous territory. August Davis wasn't just a powerful and unscrupulous man. He was a man who had killed before, and who clearly wouldn't hesitate to kill again if necessary to get what he wanted. That night, Isabella had the first of a series of nightmares that began to torment her. She woke up screaming, calling for her mother, saying that Helen was trying to warn her about a danger that was approaching. When Henry and Lily ran to her room, they found the girl sitting in bed, trembling, pointing to the window. "He was there," she said, her voice small and frightened. "The bad man Mommy didn't like. He was looking at me from the window." Henry checked the exterior of the house with the security guards, but they found no one. However, there were footprints in the wet earth under Isabella's window. Footprints that didn't belong to any of the men he had hired to protect the property. August was escalating the pressure, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before he made a definitive move. The final rupture came in a way none of them had foreseen. It was a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after August's visit, when Isabella disappeared. Henry had left early for an emergency meeting with his lawyers in New York, leaving Lily and the girl under the protection of the security guards. When he returned in the early afternoon, he found the house in total panic. Lily was hysterical, pacing back and forth in the entrance hall like a caged animal, her hair disheveled, her eyes red from crying. The security guards were searching the property, but it was obvious they hadn't found anything. Mrs. Carman was sitting in a chair, as pale as a ghost, incessantly repeating that she had gone out for only 5 minutes to hang clothes in the yard. "Where is she?" asked Henry, grabbing Lily by the shoulders. "I don't know," she sobbed. "We were drawing in the game room. She said she wanted to get more colored pencils from her bedroom. When she didn't return after 10 minutes, I went looking for her and—" Her voice failed. The bedroom window was open. There was a ladder leaning against the outside wall. Henry felt the world waver around him. August had taken Isabella, had fulfilled his threat in the cruelest way possible. The police were called, but everyone knew that time was critical. Each hour that passed diminished the chances of finding the girl alive and safe. That's when the phone rang. Henry answered with trembling hands, and August's voice echoed through the line with that icy calm that had become his trademark. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "I imagine you're worried about your daughter." "If you hurt her," Henry began, but August interrupted him. "She's perfectly safe for now. She's a charming girl, very much like her mother. It would be a shame if something happened to her." "What do you want?" "I want my daughter back. I want Lily to come to me voluntarily, and I want you to stop this ridiculous investigation into matters that don't concern you." August's voice became harder. "You have 2 hours to decide. Lily comes alone to the address I'll send, or your little girl will discover that accidents can happen to anyone at any age." The call was cut off, leaving Henry with a dead phone in his hand and a desperation that threatened to suffocate him. Lily had heard the conversation, and when he turned to her, he saw an iron determination in the golden eyes he had learned to love. "I'll go," she said simply. "No, you won't." Henry approached her, holding her face between his hands. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself. We'll find another way." "What other way, Henry?" "He has Isabella. He has an innocent child who has nothing to do with the sins of the adults around her." Tears ran down Lily's face, but her voice remained firm. "I knew this day would come. Since I discovered who he really is, I knew I would eventually have to face him." "Then let's face him together. With the police, with—" "No," she shook her head. "He'll kill her if he feels he's being cornered. Isabella is just a piece in his game, a tool to force me back. If I go, maybe he'll let her go." "And if he doesn't? If he kills you both?" Lily smiled, a sad but determined smile. Then at least we tried. At least Isabella will know that someone loved her enough to try to save her. The address August sent was of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Aspen, an isolated location where no one could hear them or interfere. Henry insisted on accompanying Lily to near the location, even knowing he couldn't enter with her. They followed in separate cars, he maintaining enough distance not to be detected, but close enough to intervene if necessary. When they arrived at the warehouse, Henry parked behind a grove of trees and watched Lily walk alone toward the deteriorating building. She looked small and vulnerable against the immense structure of the warehouse, but there was something in her posture that revealed the inner strength he had learned to admire. This was the woman who had survived an abusive home, who had the courage to escape when many wouldn't have, who had learned to love again despite all the traumas of her past. Inside the warehouse, August was waiting. He had arranged the space like a theatrical stage, a chair in the center where Isabella was tied up, but apparently unharmed, and two other chairs positioned so that father and daughter would be face to face. There was something sadistic in the arrangement, as if he wanted this to be a perverse family reunion. "Lily, my dear," he said when she entered, "finally decided to come home." "Let her go," said Lily, ignoring his words and going directly to Isabella. "She has nothing to do with this." "Oh, but she does," replied August. "She is Helen's daughter, and Helen owes me an explanation I never managed to get. Perhaps the daughter can speak for the mother." Isabella looked at Lily with those dark eyes that were so much like her father's, but without fear. There was a strange calmness in the child, as if she knew this was part of something bigger, something that needed to happen for things to finally be resolved. "Mommy said you would come," said Isabella to Lily. "She said you're brave like she wished she had been." August laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the empty walls of the warehouse. "The girl still talks to ghosts. How touching." He approached Lily, who remained standing between him and Isabella, a human barrier protecting the child. "Did you really think you could defy me? That you could find a better life away from me?" "I did find one," said Lily. "I found love. I found a family. I found a place where I can be myself, without fear." "And where is your lover now?" asked August, looking around the empty warehouse. "Why didn't he come to save you? Perhaps he doesn't care about you as much as you thought." "He didn't come because I asked him not to," replied Lily. "Because I love him enough not to want him to get hurt because of me." August studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand a complex equation. "You really believe that, don't you? You believe that love can conquer all, that it can overcome the practical realities of life." "I believe that love is the only thing worth conquering," said Lily, "and I believe you never understood that. That's why Mom had to die, isn't it? Because she chose the love of freedom over fear of you." It was the first time Lily saw a crack in her father's mask of control. His eyes darkened, and she could see there the anger he kept so carefully hidden. "Your mother was a romantic fool, just like you, and see where that led her." "It led her away from you," said Lily, "and that for her was worth any price." What happened next was too quick to be fully processed. August advanced toward Lily with a fury that had been contained for too long. She didn't try to run, only positioned herself better to protect Isabella. But before he could reach her, the warehouse door burst open with a crash. Henry entered, followed by police officers and the security guards he had hired. The private investigator had discovered the whereabouts of Gabriel, Lily's younger brother, and the young man had provided enough evidence to condemn August not only for the deaths of Helen and Lily's mother, but for a series of other crimes that had been under investigation for years. August's arrest was almost anticlimactic after all the tension. He was handcuffed without resistance, but his eyes remained fixed on Lily until the last moment, carrying a silent promise that this wasn't over. But everyone knew that it was indeed over. The evidence was solid, the witnesses credible, and finally, justice would reach the man who had destroyed so many lives. Isabella ran to her father as soon as she was untied, and Henry held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which was exactly what she was. Lily stood still for a moment, watching the reunion between father and daughter, before beginning to walk toward the exit of the warehouse. "Where are you going?" asked Henry, still holding Isabella. Lily turned, golden eyes shining with unshed tears. Away. You don't need to carry the weight of my family problems anymore. Our family problems, Henry corrected. Because you are family now, Lily. And families don't abandon each other. 6 months later, the Morrison mansion had completely transformed, not just in physical appearance, though the garden now bloomed in vibrant colors that Helen had never managed to achieve, but in the energy that pulsed through every corridor, every room, every corner that before echoed only with memories of the past. The place had truly become a home again, full of life, laughter, and the animated conversations that only exist when people who genuinely love each other share the same space. Lily hadn't left, despite having tried several times in the weeks following August's arrest. Each attempt to leave was frustrated by Henry, who simply refused to let her go, and by Isabella, who had developed a bond with her that went far beyond the relationship between nanny and child. The girl had stopped having nightmares. Her drawings returned to being colorful and full of hope, and she began to call Lily "my Lily" with a naturalness that melted any resistance the young woman might still have. Gabriel, Lily's brother, came to visit them in the spring. He was a 22-year-old man, shy and gentle, who carried in his eyes the same kindness that Henry had learned to love in his sister. The reunion between the siblings was emotional and healing, full of tears, laughter, and conversations that lasted entire nights as they filled the gaps left by years of forced separation. Gabriel had survived the years with August by developing a shell of silence and submission, but away from his father's toxic influence, he began to flourish again, revealing an artistic and sensitive personality that Lily remembered from childhood. August's trial was a long and painful process, but necessary. Lily and Gabriel testified against him, telling truths they had kept for years about the physical and emotional abuse, about the constant threats, about the climate of terror he maintained at home. Other victims appeared, women he had blackmailed, business partners he had intimidated, employees who had suffered his retaliation. The man who once seemed invincible was revealed as exactly what he was, a cowardly predator who hid behind money and connections to escape the consequences of his actions. Helen finally had justice. The evidence clearly showed that August had been at the mansion on the night of her death, that there had been a struggle, that the fall down the stairs hadn't been accidental. He had pushed her in an explosion of rage when she threatened to expose his businesses and tell Henry everything. The discovery brought a strange peace to everyone, especially to Isabella, who stopped hearing her mother's footsteps in the library, as if Helen could finally rest, knowing that the truth had been revealed. Lily was pregnant. She discovered it on a September morning, when the nausea she had attributed to the stress of the trial revealed itself to be something very different. She told Henry on a golden afternoon while they worked together in the garden planting bulbs that would bloom in the next spring. He stopped working the soil and looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise, joy, and something that could be pure gratitude. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands still dirty with soil, as if he didn't dare touch her until confirming he wasn't dreaming. "I am," she said, smiling through tears she couldn't control. "Is that okay? I know we didn't plan." He kissed her before she could finish the sentence, a kiss that was celebration and promise, past and future meeting in that perfect moment. When they separated, he held her face between his hands as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "It's more than okay," he said. "It's perfect." Isabella was euphoric with the news that she would be an older sister. She immediately began making plans to teach the baby how to draw, to take care of the garden flowers, to talk to Mommy Helen, whom she insisted was very happy about the arrival of a new child to the family. The girl had created a particular narrative where Helen continued to be present in some way, not as a tormented ghost, but as a loving presence who blessed the new developments in their lives. The wedding took place in the garden itself, in a small and intimate ceremony, with only the closest friends and Gabriel as a witness. Lily wore a simple cream-colored dress that highlighted the golden glow of her eyes and the gentle curve of her belly that was beginning to show. Henry had never felt so complete as in that moment, watching the woman he loved walk among the flowers they had planted together, promising a lifetime of love, understanding, and mutual growth. During the ceremony, Isabella scattered petals along the path and then ran to embrace them both, declaring that now they were a real family. Later, while cutting the simple cake that Mrs. Carmen had prepared, she whispered to Lily, "Mommy says she's proud of you. She says you did everything." Right. Henry and Lily's daughter was born on a spring morning when the garden was at the height of its beauty. She was a girl, small and perfect, with her mother's dark hair and a serene expression that resembled her father in his moments of greatest tranquility. Isabella held her with reverent care, whispering promises of protection and love that made all the adults cry with emotion. "What shall we call her?" asked Henry, watching the newborn sleep in Lily's arms. "Hope," said Isabella before anyone could answer, "because she is our hope that everything will continue to be good." And so Hope Morrison came into the world, carrying in her name everything that her family represented: the capacity to be reborn after tragedy, to find love after loss, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was destroyed. 2. Years later, while watching his two daughters play in the garden that now bloomed exuberantly, Henry reflected on how unpredictable life was. He had lost Helen tragically, but that loss had led him to Lily. He had faced a powerful and dangerous enemy, but that fight had strengthened the love between them. He had questioned whether he deserved to be happy again, but had learned that happiness isn't something we deserve or don't deserve. It's something we choose to build every day, through small acts of love, courage, and faith. Lily approached him on the veranda, carrying a cup of coffee and the smile he had learned to love more than anything in the world. She was pregnant again, though they hadn't yet told the girls. This time there was no fear or uncertainty, just the quiet joy of a family that had found its rhythm, its peace, its place in the world. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, leaning on the railing beside him. "About how lucky we are," replied Henry, putting his arm around her. "About how true love can overcome any obstacle, no matter how impossible it seems. Even when that love begins with lies and secrets." "Especially then," he said, kissing the top of her head, "because it means it's strong enough to survive the truth." In the garden, Isabella was teaching Hope how to plant sunflower seeds, their childish voices mingling with the sound of the wind in the trees and the singing of birds that had returned to make nests on the property. It was a sound of renewed life, of cycles that complete and begin again, of love that multiplies instead of dividing. The Morrison mansion was no longer a mausoleum of painful memories. It was a vibrant home where the past was honored but not idolized, where the present was fully lived, and where the future stretched before them like an infinite garden of possibilities. Henry and Lily had learned that true love isn't one that never faces obstacles, but one that finds ways to grow through them, transforming each challenge into an opportunity to become stronger, deeper, more true. And so they lived, not happily, ever after, because real life doesn't offer fairy tale endings, but happy in the ever after, finding joy in everyday moments,